The United States is enormous, the third largest country in the world, both by land and population, and yet, nearly half of that land, it's barely touched. Believe it or not, more people live in New York City alone than in the next 9 states combined. So what's going on? Why are such massive parts of America still so empty, even in 2025? Maine is so far north, the people living there might as well be Canadian, surrounded by our friendly, maple syrup-loving neighbors to the north, and with a landscape that looks almost identical. We're talking mystical pine forests, glacial lakes, rocky coastlines, and of course, moose. So why is this breathtaking state so underpopulated? Just 1.385 million people live here, especially surprising when you compare it to its jam-packed East Coast neighbors. Well, the answer's simple: the climate. Take a look at Maine's population density map. Almost everyone lives down south or along the coast, where the farmland's better and winters are just a tiny bit less brutal. But head north, and it feels like you've crossed into a forgotten kingdom, where winter isn't coming, it's already here. The cold is ancient, the silence feels cursed, and the snow never stops falling. The result? Not much industry, and not much reason to stick around. In fact, 89% of Maine is untouched forest. Great for hikers and lumberjacks, but not exactly a hotspot for startups or nightlife. Sure, Portland is hip, charming, and packed with great restaurants, but Maine is still the most rural state in America. Only 38.7% of its population lives in urban areas. So unless you're a trust fund baby who loves snowmobiling across a frozen lake for the 1,300th time, there's just not much keeping young people here. Most leave in their 20s, and maybe think about coming back when it's time to retire. And that might explain something else. Maine holds the title for the oldest median age in the country, 44.8 years. But Maine's not alone, because out west there's a place even bigger, even emptier, and somehow even colder. Montana is what happens when nature shows off. Endless golden plains stretch across the east, while snow-capped peaks carve through the west like a painting come to life. It's the kind of place where rivers run untamed, the skies never seem to end, and Glacier National Park feels like something straight out of a fantasy film. And yet, hardly anyone lives here. Despite being the 4th largest state in the US, yeah, even bigger than Japan, Montana's population barely crosses 1.1 million. That's less than 1% of Japan's population. With just 7.5 people per square mile, Montana ranks as the 3rd least densely populated state in America. So, what's the deal? Well, believe it or not, most Americans aren't dreaming of becoming cowboys anymore. Millennials and Gen Z aren't exactly lining up for wide-open spaces where the nearest Starbucks is 2 towns over. They want jobs, fast Wi-Fi, city lights, and maybe a decent Thai restaurant. And while Montana delivers big on beauty, it falls short on city life. The biggest city, Billings, has just over 100,000 people, and in some rural areas, your closest Walmart might be a 2 to 3 hour drive. Then there's the weather. Montana isn't just cold, it's brutal. At Rogers Pass, temperatures once plummeted to minus 70 degrees Fahrenheit, the coldest ever recorded in the US outside of Alaska. Some parts of the state even see snow in every single month of the year. So yeah, taking a scenic road trip through Big Sky country in July? Absolutely stunning. But trying to live here year-round? Unless you're prepping for real-life survival mode on expert difficulty, Montana is just too harsh, too remote, and way too empty for most. But while Montana may be wild and frozen, our next state is tiny, coastal, and crowded, yet somehow more and more people are packing up and leaving. The only thing Rhode Island really shares with Montana is the population count. Because while Montana is massive, mountainous, and full of empty space, Rhode Island is the exact opposite: tiny, coastal, and about as flat as a pancake. It's actually the smallest state in the entire country, covering just 1,034 square miles. So even though just under 1.1 million people live here, it's not because it's wildly popular. It's because there's simply no room left. Rhode Island is the 2nd most densely populated state in the US, packing over 1,000 people per square mile. Almost the entire state blends into the greater Providence metro area, a tightly packed urban sprawl squeezed between Massachusetts and the Atlantic. But here's the twist. People are leaving. Despite the crowds, Rhode Island's population is quietly shrinking. The cost of living has crept up to levels that rival New York City, and when it comes to jobs, nightlife, or lifestyle, well, let's just say Massachusetts is stealing the spotlight. So even though the state feels full, people are heading out. And coming up next, a state so small and overlooked it barely registers on most maps, yet somehow still manages to feel completely empty. Delaware may be almost twice the size of Rhode Island, but at just 1,948 square miles, it's only barely bigger than Anchorage, Alaska. And while Rhode Island has Providence as its urban anchor, Delaware's largest city, Wilmington, tops out at just 70,000 residents. So why doesn't Delaware have any major metro areas, especially when it's home to over 2 million corporations? Well, Wilmington might have had a chance, but Philadelphia just 30 miles upstream got there first. It had better positioning, fewer coastal storms, and was already booming before Delaware could make its move. As for the rest of the state, it sits quietly just outside the East 95 corridor, off the main arteries of commerce, and a bit too sleepy for any explosive growth. But instead of building skyscrapers and megacities, Delaware built something else: a corporate empire. Thanks to a legal loophole, businesses can register here, avoid state income taxes, and get this, they don't even have to operate in the state. So the economy? Thriving. The job market? Not so much. Still, one group absolutely loves this setup: retirees. With peaceful Atlantic beaches, low property taxes, and quiet suburbs, Delaware has become a magnet for folks looking to slow down, not scale up. Today, over 1.02 million people call it home. And surprisingly, that number is growing. But for everyone else, well, our next state proves that even palm trees and paradise aren't always enough to convince people to stick around. South Dakota, home to one of the most iconic landmarks in America, Mount Rushmore. But if you've ever taken a road trip through the state, you've probably been haunted by a different name altogether: Wall Drug. After passing literally hundreds of billboards promising free ice water and cowboy boots, you finally arrive at what's essentially a supersized souvenir shop dressed up as a tourist trap. And the fact that Wall Drug is the most exciting thing for hundreds of miles? Well, that tells you a lot about South Dakota. It's vast, isolated, and bitterly cold, which helps explain why it's one of the least populated states in the U.S. With just 899,000 residents spread across a landmass nearly 80% larger than Florida. That's right, more land than Florida, yet fewer people than Jacksonville. Historically, this region didn't need big cities. The Great Plains were carved out for farming, ranching, and mining, and South Dakota stuck to that blueprint. But here's the difference. Drive across Kansas or Nebraska and you'll still see signs of life. Small towns, truck stops, maybe a diner serving pie and coffee. South Dakota? You can drive for hours and not pass a single gas station. Sometimes not even a house. Just endless prairie and maybe a tumbleweed for company. It doesn't just feel empty, it feels almost post-apocalyptic. And if you think that's extreme, well, our next state makes even this feel cozy. Take everything you thought was tough about South Dakota, now crank it up to 11, scatter in some oil rigs, and drop the thermostat. Welcome to North Dakota, a state that's somehow colder, emptier, and yes, even windier. With just 780,000 residents, it ranks as the fourth least populated state in the U.S. And when winter rolls in, you'd swear half the state just packed up and vanished. We're talking sub-zero blizzards, springtime floods, and scorching humid summers. Like the weather can't decide how to torture you, so it chooses all of the above. And unlike its southern sibling, North Dakota doesn't even have Mount Rushmore to draw the crowds. What it does have is oil. But even the promise of black gold couldn't keep people from leaving. Its biggest city, Fargo, barely scrapes past 130,000 residents. Spoiler alert, it's not the next Austin. Historically, westward settlers barely paused here. They pushed on toward milder coastlines and richer farmland. Even Canadian homesteaders said nah and headed north to Winnipeg. And that pretty much says it all. Because if you thought this place felt remote, wait until you meet our next state, where even the wildlife looks lonely. Alaska isn't just big, it's absurdly big. Split it in half, and both pieces would still be the two largest states in America. At 665,000 square miles, this place is a continent masquerading as a state. And most of it is pure, untouched wilderness. Want to drive to the nearest non-Alaskan city? Buckle up. You're in for a 2,200-mile, 40-hour odyssey through raw Canadian backcountry. Even within Alaska, things aren't exactly accessible. With just 16,000 miles of road, 5,000 fewer than tiny Connecticut, most towns aren't connected by highways. You'll need a plane, boat, or a snowmobile to get where you're going. You could literally fit 120 Connecticut's inside this state. It's a place where grizzlies, moose, and wolves outnumber people. A land of glaciers, forests, fjords, and frozen tundra that makes the rest of the U.S. look like a parking lot. But make no mistake, Alaska is brutal. Just 733,000 people call it home, and many of them endure negative 40 degrees Fahrenheit winters with just a few hours of sunlight each day. Want some perspective? Mongolia, often called the world's emptiest country, has about 5.2 people per square mile. Alaska? Just 1.2. And if you take Anchorage out of the equation, that drops to a staggering 0.5 people per square mile. It's like the world's largest Do Not Disturb sign, perfect for folks who want to disappear off the grid or just avoid small talk forever. Yes, there's oil money. Yes, the state pays residents a dividend. But with sky-high costs, a fragile job market, and near total isolation, this isn't the last frontier for nothing. And just when you think it can't get any more desolate than this, our next state makes Alaska look like Times Square. Vermont. It's the kind of place you imagine in a snow globe. Cozy farmhouses, rolling hills, and forests ablaze in autumn color. Birdsong in the morning, babbling brooks, and maple syrup poured over pancakes like a scene from a postcard. And honestly, that's not far off. Despite being the 6th smallest state by area, Vermont is still largely untouched by modern sprawl. Only 39% of its population lives in urban areas, one of the lowest rates in the entire country. Add in the state's rugged terrain, dense forests, mountain ridges, and winding rural roads, and it's easy to see why just 647,000 people live here. Now here's a twist most people don't realize. Vermont shares a border with Canada, and funny enough, so do more than half the states on this list. Coincidence? Or do Americans just really hate the idea of bumping into a super polite neighbor with universal health care? Of course, the real reason is much simpler: cold. Brutal, bone deep, shovel your driveway twice before breakfast kind of cold. Most Americans, they'd rather shovel pancakes than snow. But here's the surprise. Despite all that isolation, Vermont has quietly become the most moved-to state in America since 2020. With affordable living by New England standards and a booming job scene in Burlington, it's not just cows and covered bridges anymore. So who knows? Give it a few years and Vermont might just leapfrog the Dakotas or even Alaska. But before we unveil the most breathtakingly empty state in the U.S., let's take a quick detour for a few honorable mentions. New Mexico. This high desert giant is home to 2.1 million people, but you wouldn't know it driving across the state. The population density? Just 17.2 per square mile. And without Albuquerque, where nearly half the population lives, the rest feels like a cinematic ghost town. Nevada. Sure, Las Vegas is all neon and non-stop energy, but the rest of Nevada, nearly 83% of the state is federally owned wilderness or desert. Strip away Vegas, at which holds 75% of Nevada's population, and what's left is a mirage of civilization at just 7.7 people per square mile. Unless you've been hiding out in a canyon or holed up in Rock Springs, you've probably heard the phrase, "Nobody lives in Wyoming." But here's the truth. It's not empty, it's just selectively inhabited. With just 5.9 people per square mile, Wyoming is the second most sparsely populated state in the country. That's fewer people per mile than some airport terminals. And yet, around 581,000 tough, resilient souls call this windswept land home, tucked between jagged mountain ranges, endless prairies, and high desert basins. But let's be honest, living here isn't for amateurs. There are no major cities, limited infrastructure, and winters that hit like a freight train. Need a coffee shop or a Target? You better bring a compass or a snowmobile. Unless spotting elk counts as running errands, amenities are few and far between. Economically, the state leans on its biggest employer, the government. Nearly a quarter of all jobs are public sector, from rangers to researchers, quietly holding things together in a place that often feels forgotten by time. But here's the magic of Wyoming. What it lacks in hustle, it makes up for in peace. Low population, low noise, limitless skies, and some of the most affordable land in the nation. If you're looking for solitude, safety, and starlit horizons, this might just be your American dream. So yeah, these places might have more cows than neighbors, but they also have stories, soul, and space to breathe. Empty doesn't mean forgotten. It means untouched, unspoiled, alive. If you enjoyed this, hit like and subscribe for more. Which state would you brave? Let me know below. Catch you next time.